parallel when we spoke about the rabbinic period, and we have this literature called Sefer Yetzirah, and we have also the Echalot literature, which is the literature of the people that are called Yodei Merkava, those who go down to the divine throne. And I said that in my opinion, the reason it's called those who go down to the divine throne is because of the analogy to seafarers. This is, or in other words, those are the throne farers. Those are to go sail into the Merkava, and it's a combination of text that was written out of the meditative ecstatic experience, and people who were studying Mishnah and Halakha. So they sort of tried to combine them together. I don't know if it was deliberately to give a status of a binding legal text, or just that, just as with Ezekiel, with Yehezkel, has this experience, he relates it to his own life experience. They related to their literature and their surrounding. But here is a statement by Rabbi Ishmael, which is probably a pseudo-epigraph. We don't know that Rabbi Ishmael was really the author, but a lot of the texts in this mystical literature are attributed to Rabbi Ishmael and to Rabbi Akiva. And here are the levels or the merits that are given to the person who is able to להסתכל בצפיית המרכבה, לרד בשלום ולעלות בשלום. He who watches the divine throne, who goes down wholesome and comes out wholesome, like in peace, without being harmed. Greater than all is that he enters the chambers of the palace of heaven, לחדרי חל הרקיע, להעמידו לפני כיסא כבודו, to stand in front of the divine throne, ולדע כל מה שהוא עתיד להיות בעולם, and to know everything that is going to happen. Who is going to be elevated, who is going to be lowered, who is going to be weakened, who is going to be strengthened, poor and rich, dead and alive, etc., etc. So he, in the this first segment, the person who is Yored Merkava, the throne farer, has knowledge equivalent to that of God. He knows the future. Gedolah mikulam, he also has this quality. שהוא צופה בכל מעשה בני אדם, יודע ומכיר בו. נאף אדם יודע ומכיר בו. He knows what people did. He can analyze their actions by their facial expressions. If one was an adulterer or a murderer, מכיר בכל מיני כשפים, and he knows how to perform magic. This, by the way, is something that we see. People call it the some will attribute it to medium, or I forgot the name of this show on TV, that the mentalist, right? The mentalist, but it does happen that people have I would say maybe a heightened awareness, could read facial expressions and interpret them. I mean, they have just a greater database of expressions and of nuances, and they could tell in certain cases what people are thinking of. It happens between spouses that are very close to each other and communicate well, that they would finish sentences of each other and they will know what they're referring to, even when other people seem completely impossible. But that is here attributed to the meditation or ecstatic experience. גדולה מכולם, שכל המגביה ידו עליו ומכהו, מלבישים אותו צרעת ומעטרים אותו בהרת. More than that, anyone who tries to harm that person, that throne farer, will be plagued with leprosy and with other plagues. And כל המספר עליו לשון הרע, anyone who speaks, who badmouths him, will be thrown onto the ground and on thorny bushes. that is strange. That again, this is like where I say that we have a combination of one's own experience and one meditative experience. Could be that the person who wrote that, or the author or the editor of that text, because of his practices, was rejected or shunned, and this is a kind of curse that he's trying to cast on those who chase him. Then we'll go to the next chapter. Again, he says that he knows everything. In Mishnah Aleph and Mishnah Bet, is that none are allowed to harm him. But here this is a typical Mishnah for ספרות החלות. אמר רבי ישמעאל, מה הפרש שירות שאדם משורר ויורד למרכבה? What is the distinction of the praises that one chants when he goes down to the divine throne? פותח תחילת שבח וראשית שירה, תחילת גילה וראשית רינה. The beginning of praise and the beginning of song, the beginning of rejoicing and the beginning of singing. משוררים השרים המשרתים בכל יום להשם אלוקי ישראל על כיסא כבודו הם מתנשאים. The singers who sing and serve every day to God, in front of God on His divine throne, they rise up. And here there's a wordplay on the word sharim, or meshorerim, singing, and meshartim, servant. Gilgul kiseh kevodo, the wheeling or the movement of the divine throne. What do they sing? Ranen ranen moshav, haria haria pele kli hemda, pele vafele tasmiach, tasmiach melech she'alecha. Okay, so if you understand Hebrew, it's not the Hebrew that we use today. The words are, but the construction, the constellation are different. They're basically talking. Whoever is writing this piece of liturgy or poem is talking to the divine throne, and he says, "Sing, sing, throne. Raise your voice like a shofar, a wonderful, precious vessel. Miracle upon miracle you will bring to joy. Bring joy to the King upon you." This is something that is in Hebrew called shirshur, like a chain. You link the end of one sentence or one phrase connects to the next, and it is supposed to make us feel this constant motion within the text. This is sort of the modern poetry before modern poetry, that it is structured differently. It doesn't rhyme, but it just causes us to feel like we're moving within the text. Besimhat hatan bevet hupato yasih yismach ve'agid kol zera Yaakov. Let the king who sits on you rejoice like the groom in under the huppah. Let all the children of Yaakov rejoice and be happy, as I have come to dwell under your wings. Besimchat levav shesamach becha v'sichatcha im sichat yotzrecha ve'im malkecha. With that great joy that I have with you, and with your communication or your siha is to talk with the talk or the communication of He who created you. So here in that text, the divine throne itself has sort of an identity, and the divine throne communicates with God. That is, we could say, a precursor to the theology of early medieval Kabbalists that I mentioned before, that they based on Rav Saadia Gaon, that actually used it as a philosophical term of the kavod hanivra, the created glory, and that is the idea of sort of an intermediary between humans and God. And so the divine throne is the here it has this very clear visual image, but Rav Saadia Gaon interprets in this philosophical term for the intermediary between us and God. So God is transcendental. God is far removed from us, and we cannot directly communicate to Him. So we created sort of an intermediary through which we could communicate with Him, but this intermediary is an extension of His own glory. So this is maybe what we already see here. Now, in chapter 3 of Echalot Rabbati, we find this Mishevach v'shira shel kol yom vayom Megillah. Okay, if I'll break it down by line so we see like more the structure of the text, that would be like this: Mishevach v'shira shel kol yom vayom Megillah v'rina shel sheva u'migayon המתגבר מפי קדושים הם אש וגבעות להבה נצברות ונגנזות נתיבות בכל יום ויום. So go back to this. משבח ושירה, from the praise and song of each and every day, from the rejoicing and the song of the praise, from the words that come out of the mouth of the servants, and from the words that are increasingly pronounced by the holy ones, are formed fire and hills of flames, which are accumulated and are treasured in different paths in each and every day. So that is just like we saw in Sefer Yetzirah, an interesting imagery of where we have words and song that turn into fire and flaming hills that are in turn accumulated and treasures and stored somewhere. So that is it's all sort of an abstract description of this meditated experience. And in Mishnah Bet we find this: מה לך אתה נבהל עבד נאמן, מה לך אתה מטריע משרת ואהוב. So they say, why are you scared? Why do you go back? This is the experience of the one who is in the Merkava. He hears all these songs. They're very powerful. They're moving. They are analogized to water, and he's talking. That visitor is talking to the throne, but either to the throne or to he who sits on the throne. So this is the kind of literature that we find in Safut Echalot. We also the Talmudic passage that we read in the Psikta Rabbati are also the same of the same kind of literature that we find here in Echalot literature. It is not as maybe clear or organized as Sefer Yetzirah. There's a repetition of nouns, of adjectives, a lot of titles for God. It's sort of a liturgy, sort of free liturgy in some places, free poetry. Melech Nisin, Melech Gvura, Melech Niflaot, Melech Prishut, the King of miracles, the King of might, the King of miracles, the King of distinction. Your floating chairs is surrounded by Ge'eh Ge'im Kishurei Ketarim. So I'm not going to go and translate. This could go on forever, but it seems, as I said before, that what we have from the early literature is just those attempts to take the ecstatic experience of the person who meditates and tries to connect to the divine or to himself, or however we see it, and put them into words. So this is the early literature of Kabbalah that comes from rabbinic times. Now, before we continue to the next phase in the evolution of Kabbalah, in the evolution of the mystical literature, we need to talk a little bit about the history in general, the history of the Jewish of Jewish people and Jewish literature, which are tightly connected. And I want to start maybe roll back a little bit to the time of the of Midrash Halacha, and go from there on. So, because one thing that we have to have in mind is that our literature was not created in a vacuum. I mean, no culture or literature is created in a vacuum. We tend to think of the Israelites and then later on the Jews as an isolated culture. Some people think that way, but this is not the case. This part of the world where Judaism was born and where it has evolved for at least for the first 2,000 years, it was very well connected to the cultures around it. We go as early on when we look at the story of the Exodus and the Israelites coming to Israel, and they encounter a certain nation that lives along the shore, the Philistines, right? I mean, the Philistines are also mentioned with in association with Abraham, so they're already there. Who are the Pelishtim? They are invaders. This is the literal meaning of the word Pelishtim: invaders who came from the islands. They come from certain islands, and most probably they originated in Greece. So already in that period, 2,800 years ago, there was Greek presence in Israel. Hundreds of years before Alexander the Great comes in 323 and conquers Israel. In the same manner, the ancient cultures of the ancient Near East are all intertwined: Akkadian, Sumerian, Babylonian. So when that influences the literature of the Bible, because there's a need to address beliefs and practices that are prevalent in the ancient Near East. So, for example, Maimonides will say later on that the sacrifices were part of the commandments, of the system of commandments, because that was the only way that people were familiar with on how to worship God. So God had to sort of make this concession and allow them to bring sacrifices, but ideally one should not have to bring animal sacrifices. So there's an example from the biblical period, but I want to move later on to rabbinical period. In when we start with the Greek invasion, Alexander the Great in the 4th century before the Common Era, at that time, most Jews live in Israel, and there's another community in Babylonia. Following the invasion, following the war of the Maccabees in about 200 years later, in 150, around 150, we find Jews dispersed also in Egypt and in Syria. They are heavily influenced by Greek literature and Greek culture. The rabbis praised the Greek language. They loved the Greek language. They saw logic and system in the language, and they also appreciated the beauty and the aesthetics of Greek culture. But on the other hand, they were afraid of some of the liberal elements of the Greek culture and definitely of its paganism. So, but beyond that, there is influence in the in legal analysis, in adapting elements of logic and criticism and so on. But moving on from this period to what becomes the most probably the most cataclysmic period of the time is that of the destruction of the temple. From about the year 30 before the Common Era to the year 70, which is the year of the destruction of the temple, for about 100 years, life in Israel is extremely agitated. There is a civil war between the descendants of the house of Hashmonai. Then the Romans are being called in. There is the Jewish community is fragmented into the traditionalists, or were the Sadducees that had one way of interpretation of the text. The Pharisees, the Perushim, who had a different way of interpretation and introduced maybe some new elements. They were trying to rework the halachic text in a way that they will be easily accessible to everyone, and at the same time you have people who go to the extreme. Those one group, the Zealots, decides to go towards the armed confrontation and try to defeat the Roman Empire, just as they did the Greeks. And on the other hand, we have groups who break away from the center of Jerusalem and move to the Dead Sea. This is what we call sectarian Judaism, the Essene and the Haïsim, Abaitusim. There are different names. Some of these sects, some are called Bnei Or, Bnei Hoshech. They call themselves the sons of light. One reason that they separate themselves from the temple and move to the Dead Sea is that they felt that the Sadducees have betrayed them and aligned with the Pharisees in terms of the calendar and the worship in the temple. But once they moved out, they became more and more focused on their practices that had to do that they put a very strong emphasis on purity. People had to constantly purify themselves and dip in water, and there were very strict rules of acceptance into the group. They also eschewed the mundane world and the and possessions, and from that group came the idea of baptism. Yohanan HaMatbil, John the Baptist, was actually the member of one of these groups. And his innovation was that he got out of the group and went throughout Israel, converting people to a higher spiritual level of standard of living by baptizing them. So this is a very agitated period, as I said. There were many messianic figures at the time. Jesus is only one of them, but there were many other people who claimed that they are the Messiah. And the Romans had to deal with them. Anyone who stirred some kind of excitement was considered a threat and put to death. And when we talk about the rise of Christianity, Jesus was only one of thousands of people who were executed every year. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, that we saw before in the tractate Hagigah, as someone who speaks about esoteric teachings, also has this famous phrase saying that if you hold a sapling and someone comes and tells you that Mashiach has come, first you should plant the sapling and then go and welcome the Mashiach. And he was addressing the movement within Judaism that constantly thought that Mashiach is coming, and every time someone said or claimed to be the Mashiach, they would drop everything and go to war. And Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai realized that this has a devastating impact on Jewish society, and he said, don't follow every trend every time someone says he's the Mashiach. So on one hand, he's described in this literature as someone who is a mystic. On the other hand, he's really very well planted in reality. So on the background of this tumultuous period, the destruction of the temple, the death of hundreds of thousands of people, we don't know accurate numbers, and the destruction of the temple, not just in the sense of a physical structure which is destroyed, but rather the whole system of theology comes crumbling down, because this is the structure that has been there for almost 600 years. It's the center of Jewish life, and for that structure to be destroyed and disappear means that it's not only that we lose our physical center, but that our theology may be flawed, that something is wrong with us or something is wrong with our beliefs. So this is a major crisis for the Jewish people of Israel at the time. So all this upheaval has brought to the creation of course, among other factors, to the creation of midrashic literature. Not the midrash halacha, which is the commentary on the legal texts of the Torah, but the non-halachic texts, the stories, the agadata. So a lot of that material in midrashic literature is a more liberal or free commentary on the text, and the reason that this literature started flourishing was very tightly connected to the cultural changes and to the geopolitical changes in Israel. On one hand, it was the invasion of Greek culture that was more visual, more graphic. I mean, they had the theater and physical displays of stories. Whereas you would go to the synagogue and you just read the Torah, and could be quite boring if you don't understand Hebrew. And even when they introduced the Aramaic for you, it just made the reading so much longer. So the rabbis realized we have to introduce some narrative into the service, and this is how the drasha, or the public sermon, was introduced. But besides that, the rabbis themselves commented. They said that people are not looking now for deep or dry legal analysis. They said what people need is something uplifting. They need spirit, and this is how they created the midrash. They realized that to keep people connected, if you just tell them to keep doing the mitzvot, the legal practices by rote, this is not going to keep them together. They need something, a narrative that they could connect to. And once they started working on the narrative, they realized that the most requested part of the narrative is a narrative that will explain why are we suffering, and that there is hope, that there is a certain trajectory for the world, and that at a certain point we're going to emerge from that state of affairs and be in a better place. And indeed, you look at many of the midrashim that were written in this period at that time, and they try to provide an explanation. This is also the time in our history that the whole idea of reward and punishment was relegated from this world to the world to come. So you realize in biblical literature that when there's no discussion of heaven and hell or the afterlife as we know it today, or as we know it from rabbinic literature, there is a concept of redemption, but the redemption is a personal one, or one that the world experiences here in this world. It is only in rabbinical period that the idea of the revival of the dead and the world to come became so central, because there was no way to argue that the reward and punishment occur in this world. So they had to move it to a different department and tell people, you will get it, but not here. Ironically, that was also this whole idea of redemption and the ability to get out of this vicious cycle of life in this world that was very appealing to Greek and Roman nobility, and there was a movement of conversion, part of it encouraged by the rabbis, sort of a missionary movement that brought probably tens of thousands of converts into Judaism, to the point where some scholars believe that the number of Jews in the known world was at a certain point somewhere between 2% and 10%, which is a huge number that has never been achieved since then. So, as this literature evolves, and the rabbis try to explain what is happening, and to give hope to people, that image of sort of a cosmic playground starts to emerge, where what we do here and now is not really just the here and now, but rather is connected all the way back to the time before time, and to the end of times. So this is what we could call, we could refer to as a myth, not as mythology, but rather as a myth. There's a book that I would highly recommend reading in that context. It's called The Return of the Eternal Myth by Mircea Eliade. Is a scholar of comparative religion, philosophy. He wrote an encyclopedia of religions. This is an interesting book where one of the things that he explains in this book is the myth is an idea that connects current actions, could be rituals, could be beliefs or prayers, to things that happened in a frame time which is outside the frame time of our universe. And in that manner, one second, and that when we dwell on the myth, we are able to connect to this different dimension in time and elevate our actions. And this, in midrashic literature, started with ideas that were not necessarily mystical, but already had the mystical flavor or idea to them. I'll give you one example, which this is something that many observant Jews do until today. I mean, all observant Jews and many Jews, even who are not observant, still keep that commandments in different ways, and that is lighting Shabbat candles. Right? Most observant, traditional, practicing Jews light candles or lights in one way or another. Now, here's the interesting thing: what was the source? What was the original reason for lighting Shabbat candles? I mean, the technical, simple reason. Yes.
So that you light during Shabbat because you can't
exactly
create fire on Shabbat.
Exactly. So the idea of that, okay, keep a candle lit so you could see what you eat and where you sit. Otherwise, I mean, when the couple sits down to eat, there will be a fight. A fight will break over why didn't you leave the lights on? Why didn't you pay the electric bill? And there are those who argue that today that you have our houses are flooded with electricity. We don't need to light Shabbat candles. That's just interesting in a halachic discussion. What do you do when you stay in a hotel or when you are staying by friends and you're not allowed to light candles? So originally, I'm saying about in 2 or 3 decades ago, rabbis insisted that even when you're in a hotel, you must light candles, and you should take the tea lights and light them and wait there until they die out. Today, many rabbis say, don't do that. Plug in. There's a little plug-in called Shabbat candle. It says Shabbat Kodesh, and you fulfill your obligation with that. And that's just interesting to see, like the sort of the halachic evolution where people realized that there were tragedies caused because of Shabbat candles that were left unattended, and it's better just to allow that that practice of relying on electricity. But that is the one exception. Other than that, people still light Shabbat candles, and I could say, for example, when my wife lights Shabbat candles, she takes her time. It takes her about half an hour to light the Shabbat candles. This is she lights 7 candles for Shabbat and more candles for, like Yortzei candles for in memory of righteous people and other who passed away. But that serves for her as this is a temple in time. This is a meditative time. That the quiet time that she could pray and connect. But now we come to the midrashic element here. The halacha masters established the law of lighting candles, as John said, in order to keep the house lit on Shabbat. Only on Friday night. Usually it wouldn't survive the whole Shabbat. They even have a chapter in the Mishnah, the second chapter of Tractate Shabbat, Bameh Madlikin Uvameh Madlikin. What are you allowed to use to light Shabbat candles, and what are you not allowed to use? And they write what kind of wicks, what kind of oil, what kind of vessels, etc. The rabbis of the Midrash, on the other hand, gave it a mythical interpretation, and they said the following: Why do women have to light candles on Shabbat? Meaning, they said, why not the men? Why the women? It's as if, okay, finally there's one commandment that was given to women and not to men, even though it's a rabbinical one, and you ask, why her and not him? But their answer was this. They said that Hava put out the light of the world, and she therefore has to now rekindle the light of the world. So if we take it just as a flat statement, it means it's sort of a tit for tat. It's okay, she did this, now we have to symbolic act. Hava ate from the fruits, caused death to her, to Adam, to her descendants. It's like turning the light off. Now she has to turn the light back on. That's a flat statement. But when we take it into the mythical perspective, what it does is this: it describes an act that happened in the very, very distant past, and that is sort of an act that caused crisis and disaster. And it tells you that every woman who lights a Shabbat candle brings somewhat of a remedy to that ancient crisis. So what the myth does, it makes this isolated act of a woman lighting candles, both in time and in space, and puts it on a chain, on a very, very long chain of action that runs all the way from the book of Genesis, from the beginning of time, when Adam and Eve eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, and we run all the way to the end of time, to the future redemption, when all the women that had to light candles finished lighting their candles, then so the redemption will come. So it elevates this isolated act. It doesn't matter if that woman lives in the 2nd or 12th or 22nd century, and whether she's in France or Morocco or Germany or Yemen or Japan. When she lights the candles, she is connected to this whole community of women who are fixing the world. And that's the idea of the ritual that becomes a myth. So, and that is sort of, I would say, an innocent myth. It's beautiful, it's inspiring, it's very, very helpful, it's beautiful. Now, you could have myths, and that's also the part of the evolution of this midrashic literature, that could take this to a different direction. And here comes in an influence of the of Christian experience. One of the things that was typical to early Christians is the idea of martyrdom. The martyrs who were killed by the Romans for their belief. And of course, attributed to Jesus himself, who died on the cross to atone for the sins of humanity, sacrificed his life. So the crucifixions and later on martyrdom are considered like the highest level of spiritual existence that one can achieve. This was not the case with classic Jewish theology. I know that it sounds strange that I would say it now, because we sort of got used to the ideology of the Akedah, of dying for God's name. And the first sacrifice is Yitzhak, sacrificed by his father Abraham, so about to be sacrificed, right? But when we look closely into the biblical literature, we realize that the Tanakh, the Torah, and the Bible are against animal sacrifices. So even more so, human sacrifices. I mean, okay, maybe I'm not the Torah. The Torah does describe in great detail animal sacrifices, But when we go to the books from the early prophets on, we constantly hear the idea of God does not need your sacrifices. What God wants is your heart. God wants you to listen to Him. It is said by the prophet Samuel to King Saul. It is said by the prophets Amos and Hosea, Isaiah, Ezekiel, in Psalms. It's all over the place. The first chapter of Isaiah, the prophet rebukes the Israelites. He says, I don't want you to come to my temple to trample my holy places. I don't need your sacrifices where your hands are soiled with theft and murder and corruption. In chapter 58 in Isaiah, the prophet says, tell the people to stop fasting. I don't need them to fast. I don't need them to cry out to me. I want them to tear their heart and not their clothes. So this is when the Bible speaks of animal sacrifices. What happens when it speaks of human sacrifices? All we have is, on one hand, the Akedah, right? That God asks Abraham to sacrifice his son, but we tend to forget. Some people tend to forget that at the end of the day, Yitzhak was not sacrificed. God says, I don't need it. I know that you are a God-fearing person. Let him go. So the message of the Akedah was, God does not want human sacrifices. And maybe we should have realized that Abraham, what was expected of Abraham is to stand up to God and say, no way, I'm not going to sacrifice my son. But that is also reiterated in the prophets by the prophet Micah. In chapter 6, we have in verse 8 the famous verse, Higid lecha adam ma tov u'ma Adonai doresh mimecha ki ma'asot mishpat ve'avat chesed ve'atznei alechet im Elohecha. He has told you, O man, what is good and what the Lord requires of you, only to do justice and to love goodness and to walk modestly with your God. This is beautiful. It's one of my favorite verses of the whole Tanakh, the whole Bible. But look at the previous verses. In verses 6 and 7, this is the answer. Verse 8. We have to look at the question. He says this: Bama akadem Adonai ikaf leElohim marom hakademenu be'olot ba'agalim b'nei shana. With what shall I approach the Lord? Do homage to God on high. Shall I approach Him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Would the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with myriads of streams of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for my sins? God says, no. I don't want that. I don't want human sacrifices. I don't want animal sacrifices. I want you to do justice and love kindness. And who is the person that is glorified in the Bible as the one who loves justice and loving kindness? It is Abraham. Wait, I'm running like that. The Torah tells us about Abraham in 18:19 of Genesis. I think I mentioned before. I've singled Abraham out because he will instruct his children to do tzedakah mishpat. So the text in Micah, in Micha, tells us, you remember the story about Abraham sacrificing his son? I did not want that. That was meant to teach you not to do it. But what happens in that time in Jewish existing, I mean, we go back to the Second Temple and the rise of Christianity, that the martyrdom becomes the norm. It becomes the norm for Christians, and now Jews feel that they have to imitate it in some manner. And they've already done that because thousands or hundreds of thousands of Jews died during the war. So now you need to justify that. And there is where we find the kind of literature that speaks of the angels, the same angels that we've seen in Safrut Echalot, the angel who sacrificed the souls of the righteous on the altar in front of God. That is a myth. That, not mythology again, it's a myth. It's a myth that elevates the mundane act of dying in battle or dying because you refuse to transgress your religion to a level of some kind of an act that impacts the divine world, the divine throne. There's a temple in heaven, and it reflects the temple on earth. And just as there's an altar there, there is an altar here. There's an altar there. Just as we have a high priest here, there's a higher priest there. But over there, all is perfect. This temple is corrupt and destroyed, but that temple is alive and well. Yes, Sherry.
I have a question.
Yes.
Kind of a small point, but I'm just curious to know what you think. So I understand that the Midrashic literature came out of this, this period. But do you think that it was? Do you think that was on a conscious or an unconscious level? In other words, do you think that the rabbis do you think they made they made a conscious decision to say, hey, we need to keep the people in line, in which case it's semi-manipulative, or do you think it just was a natural, evolution of thought given their circumstances?
I think that's a good question, very good question. I think probably it was a combination of both. There was first a natural development, just by the fact that they perused, they already exhausted on one level the legal interpretation of the Torah, so they moved to use the same methodology for the non-halachic part of the Torah, the narrative. That was one part of the development. The other one was that it started with a deliberate effort to just uplift people's spirits. So maybe they started telling them stories, or interject the service in the synagogue with a drasha. And then, as they went along, they realized, okay, what are the things that are more popular than others? What are the things that people want to hear? And then you have sort of a subconscious process where you and that is the same thing, with conversations. When psychologists and sociologists analyze the way people speak, the even the words that we use when you're in a conversation, you will whenever you get this kind of feedback, whether it's verbal or just body language or the number of people attending your classes, you will say, okay, this is what people want. This is what I want to run with, and so this is how the patterns emerge in Midrashic literature of. There's a lot of discussion of the relationship between Israel and the other nation, Israel and God, the chosen people, the sacrifices that we make for God, the world to come, etc. So those became major topics because those are the things that people were interested in. So it's a combination of both. So let us take a break now, and we continue with that review in the next session.